This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fanslow, and I'm not an executioner. I'm just the best goddamn bird lawyer in the world. That and more after we hear a word from our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. NAPA Autotech's team of ASE Master Certified instructors are conducting over 1,200 classes covering 28 automotive topics. To see a selection, go to napaautotech.com for more details. So I get a few messages here and there, and emails specifically, and I guess direct messages, instant messages, what have you. And starting after way back to episode 86, where I rattled off my top 5 favorite scan tools, there's been multiple requests for me to do my top Labscopes or digital storage oscilloscopes or oscilloscopes. I was working really hard to come up with 5. Maybe I'm a scope snob. I don't know. I got to 3. And after that, I struggle. Some of it's because I can't speak really, I guess, intelligently, or at least, I guess everybody knows I can't speak intelligently. That's not news. I can't speak with a lot of experience for some that are popular. And I've never had access to them, nor have I worked up the need to buy one to just use it. I have a rough time with that because some of them are spendy to do that. They certainly don't need me using them or testing them in any way. You know, it'd be cool and all, but you know, it's the math doesn't work either. So I guess I can't cop out with one spot saying, use the OE tool, which, you know, I guess works for a few. It would technically be true for my real number one, which I'm sure everybody already knows, because let's be honest, it's the benchmark. It really is. And I mean, sure, some people may not like them. I'm not sure why. Maybe they've had another tool with certain, I don't know about capabilities, but maybe features that they like that this one doesn't. And I don't think I'm really creating any kind of drama, building up any kind of suspense in my choice for number one. And it is, I will qualify it more as an automotive PicoScope. The automotive lines PicoScope lately would be like the 4425A as the 4-channel and the 4825 8-channel. They're my favorite. It's not even close. I mean, and I have to be out with it too. At one time, I had a closer relationship with PicoScope in that I worked for what was and became what is now Pico USA. So it was the largest distributor of Pico in the US, and then now has evolved to become Pico USA through, it's not really important, the details, it just is. I did work for them or particularly the guy who owned the distributor at that time, Craig Schoenberger. It was Craig Technologies. And I think it was 3 years, a little over 3 years, something like that. So yeah, I had a closer relationship with Pico than any of the other stuff I will rattle off. I don't see it changing though, because like I said, it's the bar. It's what you compare everything else to. Pick another random scope out there and it was less expensive. You know, it was only this much. You know, it's not a Pico, but you know, for the money, that's what you hear. It's really, really rare that there's much out there that's superior. The sample rate is mind-boggling. Well, I guess we have to just speak more to the actual model, but like the 4425As it's a 400 million times a second. That's max sample rate. I think I talk about kind of basic scope functions, if you will, operation. I had hock and light on. That would be episode 51, the scoop on scopes. And I go into a little more details about it. So I won't recover a whole lot of that because sample rate can be kind of one of those misleading terms, honestly. It's kind of like horsepower ratings. Sometimes they can be a little misleading. 12-bit scope, so pretty high vertical resolution, and deep memory comes in very handy for when we want to zoom in and maintain details. So that vertical resolution and the memory buffer work together with the sample rate to give us high resolution. We can collect a lot of data on the screen. We can put, seconds, plural, worth of data of a high speed signal on the screen and zoom in for detail. And then there's just multiple tools within it, be it filters, measurements, math channels, stuff like that. That when it really comes down to it, Pico is so good that it can make a novice scope user effective. And then if you really get into the scoping, you get really into using a scope and different tests, different probes, different ways of manipulating data. The ceiling on Pico is extremely high. It allows you to grow into the scope. It's not like my history with scopes where the first scope I had, not counting college, so at a shop, the first Labscope we had was the Matco Insight, which was a rebadged Intero PDA 100. And that I started running into issues where I couldn't look at data the way I wanted to. And then picked up a Sun LS2000, which was, I don't want to say rebadged. It could have been, but I think there's a UEI, I think it's ADL 7300. I'm really stretching my memory on this. I never owned one of those, so I never really had one in my hands. That tool, I think, was an improvement. It was only 2 channels, but I think it was an improvement as a pure scope over the Insight or PDA, but also limited. It was constant peak detect mode, and the reality is the sample rate, was high relative to many others. Did not have much of a memory sample point memory buffer, if you will. And then I got the Vitronics MTS 5100, which was an improvement, but I ran into still issues with aliasing, which is the scope is redrawing. Honestly, aliasing, which I know I covered in episode 51, is basically the scope does not draw an accurate representation of the signal being acquired or tested. That's really all it means. What the Vitronics would do that was brutal, if you didn't know about it, was not only would it draw something inaccurate, it was believable. It would redraw a pulse train, a square wave pulse train, just a series of square waves, if you will, that were completely believable. They're just the wrong frequency. So if you sped the scope up a little bit, put less time on the screen, the frequency would change. So you'd still have a square wave, but you would think you'd put less time on the screen, that the square waves, you'd get fewer of them, fewer pulses on the screen. That's not what would happen. Yeah, it should be a mind job. If you start thinking about what I'm saying, there should be a mind job, because it's a mind job when you're looking at the darn thing. And then I learned the hard way about how and it's not exclusive to Vitronics. Many do this, but the battery, onboard battery / charging shared the ground with the scope. So there was a couple instances where technically I was fixing the car because I had the scope hooked up to the vehicle battery. Another mind job. So rattled off a whole bunch of scopes that don't make my list, but that was the thing, is I kept growing as a user and had to keep buying different scopes. Pico was not really that way. Yes, new ones come out and they're faster and deeper memory, but if you have a 3000 series, it's still a very capable scope. It's still on par with most of the competition. If you had a 4000 series, which would be like the 4423, that was a major step up, both in sample rate and memory. It's light blue, and it's kind of got what I call the Coke symbol on it, the catch a wave signal. Or sign, I should say, not signal, but the actual kind of like icon, if you will, or icon or symbol. It's really tough regardless of skill level. If somebody asks what scope should I buy, it's really difficult not to suggest Pico because of that. You can be a novice. It's easy to use. It's good enough that it covers up a lot of missteps, not good techniques. Covers that up. And then as you get better, the scope doesn't hold you back. It's hard to find an alternative that's going to give you more capability. So that's number one of the automotive line PicoScopes. The reason I say automotive line is there is some out there that are non-automotive, and the less expensive ones aren't 12-bit. They're 8-bit, so they have lower resolution. They don't have nearly as deep a memory. They're not thermally protected, or they're not protected. The channels aren't protected. So if you pop a channel, you're probably paying to have it fixed. And where the automotive scopes have a little more give, a little more, protection, I guess. CYA. It's got a little more CYA there for you. Not that it's a common thing, but if it does happen, just a mistake, you might get away with it, or get away with it a couple of times. The general purpose scopes, which is what those other ones would fall under, no such luck. And then they typically do not work with the automotive software, which has presets in it and help menus, stuff like that. Not that the help menu is going to be something you're using regularly, but if you're starting out, it comes in very handy. It has some setups for you. It has what I would say example waveforms that are generic. So, it's not vehicle specific, but the settings can get you in the ballpark and you can fine tune it yourself. Eventually you just won't need it. And then you have Pico Diagnostics, which is another set of software that would include like the NVH, noise vibration harshness software, with appropriate probe purchase if you're buying a kit. And it's just got some tests in there that are, kind of cool to help out with reports. And it just, namely like a battery test is pretty cool. A good report dynamically tests the battery using the starter. And then you have another potential, not something I use very often, but you can use, we'll call it maybe an enhanced relative compression test, where using a pressure transducer, specifically the WPS 500X, you can thread that into a cylinder and using starter current now infer the compression pressure in the other cylinders. Kind of a neat factor. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. Is the scope perfect? No, absolutely not. Could it be better? Certainly. Everything can. I don't know what's out there that's just perfect. Maybe someday they're going to roll out another series that's just going to be that much better. They fix some of the little hangups, maybe little annoyances we have with them. NAPA Autotech training sessions are being conducted day and night in a town near you. This training caters to every level within your organization, be it a mechanical assistant, a mechanical specialist, a technology specialist, or a driver safety calibration specialist. Imagine a one-stop shop training partner in NAPA Autotech that will lead your team to a path to greatness. Autotech's entry-level Build-A-Tech classes convert the untapped potential of your new hires into money-making mechanical specialists. Autotech's higher-level tech update classes introduce specialists to the world of ever-changing technologies, which prevents your shop from getting technologically stagnant. Remember, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And, turning to the front of the store, the Autotech Service Advisor class is an awesome way to hone your client advocate skill set, ultimately benefiting the customer through an improved vehicle repair experience. But it doesn't stop there. Imagine an electric vehicle class that takes your specialist well past the mundane, yet necessary safety topics. Well, it's here. Autotech's EV Ready training is a week-long curriculum that takes participants through a hands-on experience involving hybrids and electric vehicles. The session kicks off with the use of PPE and proper tooling while touching on required OSHA regulations. Then, the students dive into the lab vehicles to gain knowledge of the common high-voltage components on EV and hybrid vehicles and their function. Attendees will be taken on a path exposing them to different electric vehicle manufacturers to compare component form and location. Additionally, information about Level 1 and Level 2 charging systems will be included, along with a quick look at DC to DC charging. The operation and maintenance of subsystems are explored, including the different modes of Tesla operations, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Commit to taking your business to the next level with NAPA Autotech training. Number 2 was tough to think about. There's 3 scopes I use regularly. Pico is the heavy hitter. The next 2 I grab, I don't know, sometimes randomly and sometimes with very purpose. But I'm going with number 2 is the AESwave uScope. It's a handheld. George calls it the run and gun scope. And that's really what it is. It's handheld. It's smaller than a cell phone. Very cost effective. It's priced such that, not that I think techs should be buying all their own tools or really many of them, but it's one of those that if you're in a shop where they're not buying tools and you just need something to do some testing, basic testing, it's hard not to go this road. It's pretty darn capable. For a little scope, it's a 12-bit vertical resolution, which is impressive. It's got some pretty good speed. If we want to get at the knock on it right off the bat, it's single channel. You're not dual channeling. But there's a lot of times you're scoping things, you don't need 2 channels. You're not going to use 2 channels. There's just no need for it. And being that it's so small, easy to carry around, it's really cool, really nice for testing stuff like under the dash. You know, there's not a lot of stuff you're dual tracing under there. If I'm testing blower motor type circuits where there's a control module involved, I'm watching the inputs and the outputs with that very quickly. If I have certain DTCs under the hood, I don't need to wheel over any of the big scopes. I really just need to go after this one circuit. Man, the uScope, it's easy to grab, holds a charge, if that makes sense. Meaning you charge it up and don't use it for a while. You go to use it, the battery's full. It's economical on the battery. Lasts. It's really simple to use. Like I said, just for a little 1-channel scope for the price, it is super capable. Which for the price sounds like I just contradicted myself. I'm not comparing it to the Pico. It's complete apples and oranges. But if we're talking about cost for a tech to pay their own money and just general usefulness, it's terrific. And also, like, I know quite a few mobile techs. They literally have the thing in their pocket all day. They might not even be there to test, so to speak. They're there to program, and they run into an issue. And they whip out the uScope and they just make a couple quick checks. And a lot of times they're diagnosing them just like that. Boom, boom. A little more detail than like a voltmeter. So it's difficult to not put the uScope at number 2. It's my number 2. And then number 3, we're going old school. It's going to be the Snap-on Vantage Pro. That freaking thing is the successor to the Vantage, which was a heck of a tool in itself. And I kid you not, I would buy a Vantage long before I would buy a voltmeter. The only voltmeters I really have, I buy for specific purposes like insulation testers, high voltage meggers, if you will, high voltage insulation testers. That's why I have a meter, fluke meter, if you will. Otherwise, I wouldn't have one. Not a pure meter. I just don't see the point. I would have Vantages. I would buy Vantages. You can pick them things up online for a few $100, but what officially takes position 3 here is the Vantage Pro. It's the next step up. Much, much, much higher resolution screen, which isn't saying a whole lot because if you ever see the Vantage screen, it is not high def at all. I think the Game Boy, if you've ever seen that, I think that's higher res than the freaking Vantage. The scope, actual processor and stuff, if you want to, the guts, if you will, is way higher definition than the screen. The screen did not do it any justice. But the Vantage Pro, much higher resolution screen, much higher resolution scope itself. The argument would be is the Vantage is not, I think they might even call it like the Vantage Heritage. The Vantage is not really a scope. It's a power graphing meter. Okay. Much like if you recall the OTC Perception, it was a graphing meter, a power graphing meter. Power graphing gave it more capability than just a graph meter. Some processing going on that made it much more effective. The Vantage Pro is a legit 2-channel Labscope, 12-bit resolution, pretty decent memory for back in the day. And honestly, even compared to a lot of what's out there now, it's pretty freaking decent. And it had the power graphing meter functions. It did. It had a database on how to connect. The problem is that it's dated now. Most of the cars you're pulling in to use it on, the database is not going to pertain to it. But the pure test tool itself, it's a freaking Swiss Army knife of automotive test equipment. It is, in my mind, borderline criminal that no other equipment manufacturer has worked on coming out with its successor, which is, it's asking a lot, you know, especially if we start factoring in like the database, that would be asking a lot. But to have the power meter functions and then the capable Labscope portion, the capable DSO with pretty decent sample rate. I'm pretty sure we won't talk so much about burst rates, stuff like that, but you know, a million times a second. The buffer, I think, was like 512,000, and it's seamless. That was really what separated it from a lot of the other scopes. The buffer is seamless. So as it's collecting, you can think of there's an entry point where it's coming into the buffer and then the exit point where it's gone forever. Between those two is completely seamless. As long as you saw it on your screen or really didn't even see it on your screen, as long as it happened in that time frame you didn't lose it. Really, that's no different than say like a Pico or really any scope. It's just the way the Snap-on displayed things where the screen you're looking at is kind of a small window into a much, much larger collection. Kind of like almost looking in not knowing this house is quite that big and looking through the window and seeing a room. That's kind of what the most of the Snap-on scopes, honestly, whether it's the Vantage Pro, the Modus, the Viruses now, or the Zeus, stuff like that. They along the same lines, but it's just I think very well described. A very good description of it is it's a Swiss Army knife of test equipment. Had internal amps, meaning you set it up like an ammeter and you could graph current with great detail. And why that was so awesome was with MR sensors, if you wanted to scope the current of the mass airflow sensor or an air fuel ratio sensor, and these are in higher microamps, low milliamp range, you could do it with the Vantage Pro. You didn't have to go and buy a fairly expensive inductive current clamp milliamps probe to do that. Is it harder to hook up? Yeah, of course. Can be, depending on, right, you know, specific systems and all that, or vehicles, platforms, stuff like that. But you already had something that was capable. So you were doing these tests without buying a new probe. It could already do it. And then, of course, being able to graph, you know, duty cycle, which now the other ones have followed suit. A lot of the other scopes have added it. Pico's added it, where we can graph pulse width and we can graph duty cycle through a math channel, where the Vantage Pro, we could just say, did it maybe a little more natively. You know, probably fundamentally, when you really get down to it, it's probably ultimately the same, but you had a pretty powerful graphing multimeter. And you can still find these guys. I've found a lot of them on Facebook Marketplace. A couple of them will pop up once in a while on like a diagnostic network, maybe IATN, but really I've found quite a few on Marketplace, Craigslist, eBay. They still go for a fair bit of money. On the lowest end, people that don't know what they have, they'll sell them for $200-300. People that have a little bit of an idea what it is, $500. Or they just don't, you know, they're not looking to make a killing on it, or they're looking to help somebody out. You know, it's paid for itself. No reason to kind of, I don't want to say gouge. They're not gouging anybody, but getting what they probably could. They don't feel the need, and good on them. And on the higher side, you know, $1,000 to $1,200 for one in really good condition. I probably have 5-6 of these things laying around, because when they break, I'm not really sure what you do. Kind of like DRB3s. I have a few of them because when one breaks, I don't know what you do. I mean, those are my top ones. After that, there's got to be honorable mentions. One is the ATS series. There's a 8-channel and the 4-channel. I do not have a lot of experience with these. The most time I've ever got to spend with one was working with Mr. Manna, Mr. Scott Manna, who, if you didn't know, they tried to name a street after him in the Mount Prospect area, kind of in the Chicagoland area. They tried to name a street after him. They quickly had to change it back because, honestly, nobody crosses Scott Manna. I got a chance to work on a class with him at Vision. Unfortunately, for me, I guess, I think it worked. Probably worked out great for the attendees because they just got more Scott Manna, but I felt ill. I did not feel good. I had a terrible sore throat, terrible headache. And this was long before COVID, so I'm pretty sure I didn't have that. Wasn't good. Towards the end of the class, I remember I was running the scope for Scott. It was kind of live car, and I had my head on my elbow. I mean, I was head on the table, darn near, laying on using my arm as a pillow, navigating the scope laptop. Brutal. But in leading up to that, weeks leading into it, I got to spend time with Scott and the ATS scope and use it. That's the limit of my experience. It's very limited. So it's hard for me to speak to it other than it doesn't suck. There's a lot of people that really, really are passionate about it, really, really like it. 8 channels with fairly decent sample rate. I think the sample rate is about 1 million samples per second. And then the way it captures is I don't think it has a buffer quite the way we think about it. And they have a lot of features, if you will, that are very, very thoughtful towards automotive technicians. Very thoughtful. And then really, maybe its most powerful asset is it's a legitimate 16-bit. So it is ultra high vertical resolution, which lets it do some pretty amazing things So if you think about it, we're talking about the sample point memory buffer. The deeper that is, the higher that number, the more time we can put on the screen and then zoom in for detail. That's kind of horizontally, if you will. Vertical resolution is the other way, vertically, if you will. And with that super high resolution, you can have a big voltage range on there. You could scope the CAN network with a 50 volt range or 100 volt range and zoom in. And it's, I think, specifically to like port fuel injection, scoping the voltage on the control side, you can zoom in. We'll just say like the hold section where voltage is pulled down, then current flows. You can zoom in on that kind of that hold section and oftentimes pick out the pintle bump pretty clean in the voltage. That's pretty impressive. And then we have other scopes out there like the Mix Sig. I think gets a lot of fanfare. The price I think is attractive. The people will point to the bandwidth, and that's a lot of these scopes we're starting to see aimed towards us. The just ultra high bandwidths. Pico, the bandwidth's 20 megahertz. Some of these other ones are 100, 200, 300, really high, which you're thinking, oh, that's got to be better. Again, specs. It's not so much any one spec means any one thing. It's a combination. How do they all work together to provide you an accurate representation of the signal you're testing, and then the flexibility to do certain things like zoom in. Usually these scopes are extremely fast, super high sample rates, gigasamples, 1 gigasample sample rates versus, like I said earlier, Pico's 400 million. So, wow, gigasample, that's got to be way better. What I've found is many of these scopes, the vertical resolution is not 12-bit, certainly not 16-bit, it's 8-bit. So what would happen is if there's much for zoom functions, you get this really stair-steppy look. The vertical resolution would be the positions that the voltages can go, the voltage measurements can go. And the lower the resolution, the further apart those spots can be. So instead of maybe zooming in and having this relatively smooth rise in voltage, it literally looks like a stairway. It's less expensive and, quote unquote, if you will, easier to make a low resolution scope fast. It doesn't necessarily help us in the bays. So, but I know there's a lot of people, they like them. They love them. I don't have one. Yeah. Same with the Handtechs. They have PC based ones. I think they have a couple handheld ones. One looks like a freaking knockoff of a Tektronix THS series scope. Same thing though. Super fast. Not much for memory. Not much for vertical resolution. So fine if you're not doing much for zooming. Fine if you're not worried about collecting a lot of data on the screen to capture an intermittent and then zooming in. If they have good trigger options that work well, a lot of times you can just set up the triggers to trigger on an anomaly to help you use these scopes effectively. So there you have it. By listener demand, my top Labscopes. Yeah, let me know what you think. I'm anxiously awaiting the hate mail. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you find it useful. If you have any more questions or ideas for future episodes, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I think I'm fairly easy to get a hold of. Otherwise, if you know a guy who knows a guy, probably find me that way. Otherwise, you can certainly email me at mattfanslowpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah, wrap this all up. And first, do not want to forget to thank our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. I will even thank the Aftermarket Radio Network. Why? Because I have to. Just kidding. I don't have to, but I do because I am thankful. They let me do this. Okay, maybe that wasn't a compliment. I meant it as a compliment. You let me know. Until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Matt Fanslow, diagnosing the aftermarket A to Z on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Matt on your favorite listening app. He's very interested in what you have to say. Let him know what you'd like him to cover and come on the show. Matt is all for advancing the aftermarket. Find Matt Fanslow on social media and connect or on aftermarketradionetwork.com.